A former American research institute says Russia is losing its initiative in the war, meaning its military is currently losing. Zelensky, the president of Ukraine, also stated that Russia is losing its initiative on the battlefield and becoming internationally isolated. Today, let's take a closer look at this issue. Let's check it out now. Ukrainian forces are reportedly doing well in several areas. First, here's what President Zelensky recently said. President Zelensky of Ukraine stated that their goal is to secure the capability to produce 600 drones and missiles per day. He also said that they would make Russians experience the same things that Ukrainians are going through. This means they intend to attack with 600 drones and missiles every day. In fact, Ukraine has become self-sufficient in drone production and can manufacture drones on its own. Just a year ago, Chinese parts were essential, and Ukrainian military officers even had to smuggle them. But now, you don't see that happening anymore. The Ukrainian government has prioritized domestic drone production. Before the war in 2022, there were only about 7 drone-related companies, but now that number has surged to over 500, and they are developing a mass production system. In fact, the Ukrainian military's success in domestic drone production has had a significant impact on the war. Let's look at some recent examples. The Ukrainian military carried out drone attacks on the Crimean Peninsula. In particular, they focused their attacks on bridges to cut off supplies to the Crimean Peninsula. They concentrated their attacks on the Chonhar Bridge, which connects the southern Kherson region and the Crimean Peninsula, which was annexed by Russia. Traffic was temporarily shut down. Since May, the Ukrainian military has focused attacks on roads, bridges, and infrastructure to the Crimean Peninsula. As a result, it has been confirmed that there is even a fuel shortage in the Crimean Peninsula area. Since June 4th, cash sales of gasoline have been completely banned. Gasoline requires coupons for purchase, and each person is limited to 20 liters or less. Ukrainian drone attacks are also ongoing in St. Petersburg and Moscow. The Ukrainian military is launching attacks that were previously unimaginable. As a result, even cities that were once considered to be in the rear are now overshadowed by the threat of war. But that's not the end of it. The reason Russia is even more tense now is not because of the front lines, but because of the information war. Recently, there have been growing rumors inside Russia that Ukrainian intelligence agencies are trying to secure large amounts of CCTV footage and surveillance data from all over Russia. Russian authorities are reportedly taking this very seriously, with President Putin's security system under review. Why is CCTV so important? In the past, it took a long time and a lot of manpower to analyze a specific person's movements or lifestyle, but now the situation has completely changed. When AI analyzes countless CCTV footage and location data, it can determine to a significant extent when a specific person goes to work, where they visit, and which routes they prefer. Even if the security vehicle changes, movement patterns usually stay the same. As more data is collected, predictions of future actions become more accurate. As recent attacks on Russian military officials continue, these concerns are increasing. On June 9th, a car bomb attack occurred in the outskirts of Moscow. Reports say the head of the department supplying Russian missile and artillery ammunition was killed in the explosion. The explosive device under the vehicle reportedly had the power of 300 to 400 grams of TNT. Russian investigative authorities immediately launched an investigation, but there are suspicions within Russia that someone may have tracked the victim's movements for a long time. Also, this type of incident has occurred multiple times. Over the past several years, there have been repeated mysterious explosions and assassination attempts against Russian military generals, logistics officials, and defense industry personnel. Russia is already struggling on the front lines, and now even key rear personnel are under threat. Especially with the combination of drones, AI, and large-scale data analysis technology, tracking capabilities that in the past only national intelligence agencies could perform are now possible at much lower costs. This is why Russia is as concerned about intelligence advances as it is about Ukraine's long-range drone attacks. Because war now goes beyond the front lines, spreading into cities, rear areas, and daily life. Additionally, this year Russia faces a worsening situation from troop shortages caused by the prolonged war and Ukraine's new tactic of striking the Russian mainland. Oleksandr Syrsky, commander-in-chief of the Ukrainian Armed Forces, stated on June 8 that Ukraine struck 111 Russian military, industrial, energy, and fuel infrastructure targets in the past month through deep strikes. He said these caused Russia about $1.058 billion in direct and indirect economic losses. Of course, since this is a claim made by the Ukrainian military, it should be taken with a grain of salt, but it is clear that the situation for the Ukrainian forces has definitely improved compared to before. Since Ukraine's 2023 counteroffensive, Russia has suffered a net territorial loss. In the past month, Ukrainian forces reclaimed more territory than Russian forces occupied. Now, Russia is even allowing counterattacks. President Putin of Russia claims that the Russian forces are advancing every day. The U.S. Institute for the Study of War says that President Putin of Russia continues to claim that Russian forces are advancing every day. It said he simply does not specify in which direction, effectively mocking the situation of the Russian forces. Of course, since Russia itself is such a large power, it's hard to say that the current changes are a sign that will completely turn the tide of the entire war. Russia still possesses massive manpower, resources, and a vast defense industry production capacity. Despite years of ongoing sanctions, Russia continues its military production, and the assets it can deploy to the front lines remain at a considerable level. However, there is one clear fact. The rise of drones is changing warfare. Previously, it was thought that a major power with greater military spending and more fighter jets, tanks, and warships would automatically dominate. The key to modern warfare has been who can produce and maintain more advanced equipment, but the war in Ukraine has changed this. Tanks costing tens of millions of dollars are destroyed by FPV drones worth only thousands of dollars, and military facilities valued at hundreds of millions of dollars are repeatedly paralyzed by inexpensive suicide drone attacks. These changes are creating new opportunities even for countries with weaker militaries. Previously, threatening key facilities or supply lines of powerful nations was hard, but now it's much cheaper. Attacks on supply networks are now seen as very effective. Attacking vehicles, rail networks, and warehouses moving ammunition, fuel, and equipment can cause more damage than targeting frontline troops. Most of the targets Ukraine has been focusing on recently are also these kinds of facilities. Currently, a significant number of Ukraine's long-range airstrikes are being carried out by drones. Previously, such operations required costly fighter jets and cruise missiles. Now they use domestically made drones to strike targets hundreds or even over 1,000 kilometers away. Even if an attack fails, the losses are relatively small, so continuous operations are possible. For this reason, Ukraine has gained the ability to continue the war for much longer than expected. That's because even if Russia deploys massive quantities, Ukraine can produce countermeasures at a relatively low cost. That's why military experts observing the current war are focusing more on the number of drones produced, software development capabilities, and operational systems that utilize data rather than the number of tanks and fighter jets. In future wars, it's becoming increasingly likely that the key factor determining victory will not be who has more weapons, but who can apply technology faster and implement it on the battlefield. So, surprisingly, the places studying the war in Ukraine most diligently are not just the countries directly involved in the conflict. Military officials from the United States and various European countries are also continuously observing the Ukrainian front. In fact, Western military officials who have visited Ukraine say that the lessons they can learn on the ground are much greater than they expected. What they are particularly focusing on is not a single specific weapon. It's the entire process of producing, improving, and deploying drones to the front lines. When new equipment appears, the Ukrainian military immediately puts it into actual combat to test its performance, fixes any shortcomings, and then redeploys it to the front. This process repeats every few weeks, and changes that once took years in traditional militaries now happen rapidly on the battlefield. NATO countries have begun reviewing their doctrines. After the Cold War, NATO prepared for war around fighter jets, precision-guided weapons, and securing overwhelming air superiority. In the Ukraine war, inexpensive drones are increasingly having more impact than costly weapons, targeting not just tanks and armored vehicles, but also infantry positions and ammo depots. From NATO's perspective, they have no choice but to analyze the changes occurring on the Ukrainian front in order to prepare for future wars. The same goes for Taiwan. As China continues its military pressure, the Taiwanese military sees the Ukraine war as an important case study. In particular, Taiwan is at a disadvantage compared to China in terms of national power and troop numbers. In this situation, there is interest in what kind of impact affordable and mass-producible drone capabilities can have. In fact, Taiwan has recently been announcing plans to expand drone production and strengthen its unmanned systems capabilities one after another. South Korea is no exception. Analysts say North Korea is expanding cooperation with Russia and watching various tactics from the Ukraine war. There is strong interest in drone operation, the ability to counter electronic warfare, and long-range strike systems. There are increasing calls for the South Korean military to study the new battlefield environment seen in the Ukraine war, instead of relying solely on current methods.